This happened quite a long time ago, but I remember when we had saved up some money, and it wasn't easy. Funds were tight, but we had this money set aside, and in my mind, it was for a certain project. And I thought I had talked to my husband about it, but he also had plans for the money that he had not talked to me about, and it was probably just a communication problem. But what happened was that he spent the money first, and that meant that my project was not going to happen, and I was quite sad about that. Well, you can't spend money twice. I know it sounds so obvious, but sometimes in our budget, we overspend on something or we buy something on impulse and we think, oh, I'll figure it out later. But you just can't spend money twice. Well, it's the exact same thing with our time. We can't spend time twice, and sometimes we get a little too optimistic and we think that we can accomplish a lot of things at the same time. But what happens is we end up trying to multitask. And in this video, we're going to talk about 4 things to keep in mind when we're tempted to multitask, because it's really not a good use of our time budget. So the first thing to keep in mind is that when you multitask, if you are trying to do 2 things at once that are both intellectual or mental tasks, you're really not actually doing both at once. So let me explain. If you have a computer that's kind of being slow, or a website that's really not working quickly that day, you've probably had this happen where you're kind of waiting for the computer or the website. So in between those few little seconds in between each thing, you try to do something else on your computer. Well, you're not actually doing both things at once. You're going back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. Well, it's not very efficient because every time you go back to one task, you have to kind of get your mind around it again. And then you go to the other, same thing. So you're really not getting much accomplished. The other thing is, it can be really stressful. It's a lot easier to concentrate on one thing at a time than to try to be juggling 2 things at once, going back and forth with them. When you juggle, you're not holding all the balls at once. You are holding one at a time. But it can be very stressful because you're afraid you're going to drop one. And so if you're having a problem with a slow computer or a slow website, probably the best thing to do is to either fix the problem, so that might mean upgrading your computer, or find a better time. Because if the website's slow or the internet's slogging, you may come back later and it might be working much better. And so multitasking is not really a solution. We can't really do 2 things at the same time. We can't spend our time twice. So once time is gone, it's gone. And if we used it inefficiently, then we don't have that time back. We've got to find more time for it. So when we talk about multitasking, the second point is that we should save it for a combination of a physical and a mental activity. So body and brain instead of body and body or brain and brain. So let's look at an example here. If you try to do 2 physical things at the same time, if you tried to jog while you're doing the dishes, well, that doesn't work so well, does it? You're probably going to drop something. And so it's difficult to do 2 physical activities at the same time. You can't give your full attention to both at the same time. You're just kind of going to be juggling them. And also 2 brain activities, that does not really work, as we've previously talked about. We just end up going back and forth, and it's stressful and highly inefficient. However, you can combine a physical activity and a mental activity. And this probably could be seen as multitasking, but it's not as difficult to do, and it's not as ineffective as if you were doing 2 physical things at the same time or 2 mental things. So some examples of that would be listening to an audio book while you're walking, or watching a video while you're on the treadmill, or singing along to music while you're cleaning, things like that. So you're engaging different things. You're engaging your body and your brain instead of trying to do two body activities or two brain activities at the same time. So that's the second point. When we think about the idea of budgeting our time, multitasking is not a good use of our time budget in terms of mental activities. It should only be used for combining a physical and mental activity. So the third point is that we need to realize we give our best performance when we concentrate on one thing at a time. When you fully concentrate, you have complete focus, you can produce amazing results. And you also will likely finish sooner when you're only concentrating on one thing at a time. Your work will be better. You can be more creative. You have more ideas flowing because you're not distracted by trying to multitask. You're just focused on that one thing and your brain can really lock onto it. The other thing is you're less likely to miss details or to forget things when you're focusing on one thing at a time. You'll also need less time in your time budget for tasks when you do this. When you decide that you're going to fully focus on one thing at a time instead of multitasking, your performance will be amazing. You'll be more productive, you'll be more efficient, and you are going to be able to accomplish things in less time. Now, the fourth thing we need to keep in mind when we're tempted to multitask is why. Why are we trying to multitask? Maybe it's because we're trying to do too much. If you find that you just feel so pressured in regards to your time schedule, why is that? Why do you feel stressed? Why do you feel pressured? Why do you feel like you have to try to do two things at once? Maybe it's because you are overcommitted and you're trying to take on too many responsibilities. This has definitely happened to me many times. And I think, again, we've talked about optimism and it's really a symptom of that sometimes we think we can be Superwoman or Superman and that we can do everything that everybody asks us to do. And it's just not possible. The other thing I've found is that as you go through life, you take on responsibilities and then you take on more responsibilities and you never drop some of the old ones. So you're just continually adding to your responsibilities. And eventually our schedule can really get out of control. It can cause that time pressure, that time stress that leaves us feeling we have no choice but to try to multitask. And we've already seen that that's not very efficient. We're not doing our best work when that happens. And so we have to learn how to say no to other people, to ourselves sometimes when we have, 5 new projects we want to start and maybe it's not realistic. We need to probably use the same idea as if you have a certain amount of space in your closet and you buy 5 new shirts. You probably should go to your closet and take out 5 old shirts. And if you don't, your closet's just going to keep getting more and more crammed. And that's what happens to our schedule. If we take on something new and we don't drop something old, our schedule is just going to get so crammed that we're going to be pressured and out of control. And so what do you do if you find that you're already in that place where you have said yes too many times, you've taken on too many responsibilities, and you're just so stressed that you think the only way you can keep up is to multitask? Well, one of the first things you could do is a little experiment. Would anybody notice if you stopped doing something? Sometimes we just do things out of habit or because they were necessary for a time and they might not be necessary anymore. So if it's not something that's very crucial, you could try not doing it and see if anybody notices. maybe it's not as important as you thought. Maybe you're just doing it out of habit. And then if you find that you still have so much work that you feel like you're forced to multitask, you need to take a look at all your responsibilities and see what you could get rid of. Now, obviously, I'm not talking about just walking away from something you're responsible for, but there are ways that you can do this. Maybe it can be delegated to somebody else, or maybe you can say to a boss, for example, I am not keeping up. I don't feel like I'm doing my best because I have too many things. So could you please tell me what are the priorities that I should focus on? And then the other things will happen if there's enough time. If there's not, they'll need to be done by somebody else. But if I'm going to be at my best, I need some relief from this. Sometimes we just need to have an honest conversation. But sometimes these commitments and responsibilities are things that we have put on ourselves. And so we need to give ourselves some grace and take a quick, hard look at things and say, this is too much. This is causing me to multitask. It's causing stress. And so what can I eliminate that's going to make my life less stressful? So we've looked at 4 aspects of multitasking and why it's not a good use of our time budget. First of all, we're not actually doing 2 things at once. We're just going back and forth. Secondly, we should save multitasking for a combination of physical and mental activity. Third, we realize that if we can stop multitasking and focus on one thing at a time, we'll be able to give our best performance. And fourth, if we find that we're being forced to multitask, we're probably trying to do too much and we need to get rid of some responsibilities. So a question for you: does multitasking make you stressed? Feel free to comment below. Does multitasking make you stressed? Make sure you subscribe so that you can see more videos about time budgeting.